All right, Bryan Kohberger. I'm going to do this while I'm driving. I've noticed that some people do their podcasts from their cars and vans. I haven't been up to where he is. I've been through that area before. There's a lot of crime that people don't know about up in that area, some very serious criminal networks. That's one reason I won't buy a house there. I mean, Albrightsville actually is an area, a part of that Stroudsburg area that for people shopping for real estate is known for having less expensive houses within, well, it's not within that much of a commutable distance of New York City, but for people who only have to show up once a week, once a month to their jobs in New York City, it's fine. And so it became a hot real estate market for a while there until the interest rates spiked. Before I get started, I do have to say that I am a contractor who works for major corporations and the government. Nothing that I say reflects the views of any of my employers. My employers pretty much are very large and all have their own public relations departments, and some of them even forbid us from talking on their behalf. Like if a reporter would come to my workplace and shove a microphone in my face, I could not comment on behalf of my employer. In fact, under those circumstances, I really couldn't even say what I thought personally. But here I am in my own car, and I can say what I think personally. And in this case, I feel I can add some real knowledge to the situation here. Okay, first of all, I saw news commentators, I won't even call them reporters, people who take the news and just comment in the mainstream media, saying that Bryan Kohberger was OCD vegan because he didn't like his food cooked in the same pots and pans as meat. I wrote a vegan cookbook in 1998. I'd been a vegetarian since 1984 until the year 2020 when I gave it up for health reasons. I went vegetarian in 1984 because of concerns for animal rights. I went vegan in 1997 because of health concerns, especially surrounding the mad cow disease scare. It's not uncommon for vegans and even vegetarians to not want their food cooked in the same pots and pans or handled on the same surfaces of meat. They don't want cross-contamination with diseases. I mean, there's a lot of E. coli and salmonella and other harmful bacteria in meat. And E. coli basically comes from poo. And when they say, oh yeah, spinach or lettuce had E. coli and it's being recalled, well, that's because there was probably animal farming going on in the area, and it washed into those fields. Because by themselves, spinach and lettuce do not have E. coli. E. coli comes from animal poo. And sometimes it gets into the meat because at slaughterhouses, mistakes are made. An intestine is cut open at the wrong time in the wrong place. And that's how you get E. coli contamination. But in the late 1990s, Howard Lyman was touring the country with his book Mad Cowboy, and he went on the Oprah show, and he told her about a lot of the situations under which cattle were raised at the time, and still are. Non-organic cattle that aren't grass-fed. And Oprah said, oh, I will never eat another burger because of things that Howard Lyman told her. And she got sued for that from some cattlemen
Your destination is on the left.
organization. And of course, Oprah won because their lawsuit was really frivolous. The assumption he was working under was the whole prion theory of mad cow disease. And not everybody buys that, but if you believe the prion theory of mad cow disease, that means that you think that these prions are not killed by normal cooking temperatures. In fact, according to this theory, prions are almost indestructible. Doctors can't autoclave their instruments because apparently the high heat doesn't kill them. And there is another theory of mad cow disease, Mark Purdy's theory, that it was caused by organophosphate pesticides, which in Britain at the time was required to be put on non-organic cows to kill the warble fly. And it was an oil-based solution, which some people say is more potent than the aqueous-based one, if you know what that means. And they would apply it along the cow's spine. Well, next thing you know, they had like spongiform encephalopathy, which means that the brains are full of holes. And, the cows would just be collapsing in the field. And it was pretty nasty, and people were afraid of it coming to this country. Well, the human form of that is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, I think is how you pronounce it, CJD for short. And people were afraid of that because it has a lot of similar symptoms to dementia and Alzheimer's, and people don't want to lose their minds naturally. I mean, they want to hold on to their mental faculties as long as they can. And CJD did rise after mad cow disease, and people are saying, aha, that means mad cow is here. Mark Purdy, on the other hand, said that it had a lot of the same symptoms as manganese poisoning, and he found that having manganese in the soil, high concentrations of it, was related to this. And he went into a totally different theory of how prions became infectious and where mad cow disease came from. And even in Wisconsin, where there's mad deer disease, you can go below the ground in Cave of the Mounds and see the manganese formations, which are beautiful purple stalactites. And it does have manganese in the soil. I mean, there's all this biochemistry involved around it. But basically, he said it was the pesticides that caused it, in combination with what was in the soil. Now, there was another doctor named Broxmire, Lawrence Broxmire, whose specialty was researching, doing reviews of tuberculosis research. And he basically thought it was a form of tuberculosis. What was seen in it wasn't all that different from what had been seen with TB before. And TB is a special kind of organism. If you know anything about pleomorphism, you know that cancer and tuberculosis are related. You're talking about filterable forms of organisms. This is all the Royal Rife research from the 1930s. And Broxmire knew more about tuberculosis and that it can go into L forms to evade the immune system where it goes without its cell membranes. I mean, just all kinds of weird things. And he thought that maybe organophosphates, maybe something else, maybe what was in the soil, but it kind of pushed tuberculosis into a weird form. Maybe more lethal and more likely to infect the brain than other times, and that it was just our good old friend tuberculosis, which has been with us forever. And he even compared maps in Britain of where mad cow and where tuberculosis was found, and they're pretty much a match. So, I mean, there's all these different theories out there. I had already been near vegan before the mad cow scare, but that kind of pushed me over the edge. Howard Lyman, I went to see him speak, I think it was in Santa Monica, some health food store in the Los Angeles area. I went to see him speak personally, and it convinced me. I mean, he gave a very compelling argument how we shouldn't be eating any animal products at all, and it pretty much saved his life because, he'd been having a lot of health issues before he went vegan, so I went vegan. I also have this other credential. First of all, I did write the vegan cookbook in 1998, but in the early 2000s, like 2004, I think, either late 2004 or early 2005, I became the meetup organizer for the New York City Vegetarian Meetup Group. And this wasn't something that I wanted to do. It was something that I felt I had to do to keep the group going, because we went through something like 3 organizers. None of them had time for it. It was pretty much it was a volunteer position. I mean, and then eventually Meetup started charging the organizers fees, so you had to pay to be the meetup organizer for the vegetarian meetup group. I met hundreds of vegetarians that way. My first meetup, we had over 40 people show up at Udipi Palace in New York City. I don't even think that's there anymore. It was a nice vegan Indian restaurant. And I will tell you, most vegans prefer to eat food that has been prepared in an all-vegan kitchen. And vegetarians feel the same way. They don't want, little pieces of beef from the grill that kind of wandered into their food. They don't want the grease from the beef. They don't want the risk of pathogens, mad cow or not. I mean, there's other things like salmonella and listeria and things like this going on, E. coli, of course. They don't want that in their food. And, you can't blame them. They just don't want it. But, a lot of them are easygoing, and they'll put up with it if they have to. But if you take them to a vegan restaurant or an all-vegetarian restaurant, they prefer that. And I mean, pretty much, I can't think of one person who didn't feel that way when they expressed these kinds of opinions. So it's not OCD, it's not abnormal, and not only that, veganism is not that weird. I mean, there are a lot of people in India who, for religious reasons, and same in China, who are vegetarian. Jews and Muslims don't eat pork. Mormons don't drink coffee. I mean, there are so many religious and other dietary choices. You're basically picking a fight with billions of people on this planet. It goes against everything for freedom religion in this country, and on a global scale, you're in the extreme minority thinking that way. There are a lot of totally nice vegetarians who will go along with everything. I mean, some of them aren't even totally vegetarians. And this is one thing I've learned from the vegetarian meetup group. A lot of vegetarians and vegans, what are these people doing? A lot of vegetarians and vegans, so, I mean, there's a wide variety. It's what they call pescatarians. Those are the people who call themselves vegetarians, but they still eat fish. Pseudo-vegetarians, people who call themselves vegetarians but also eat chicken and fish. Ovo-lacto-vegetarians, those are the people who eat cheese and eggs, who usually prefer not to eat that much cheese or eggs, but they're worried about getting their protein. They're ovo-lacto-vegetarians. There's just vegetarians proper who, who knows, it could be ovo-lacto, it could be vegan. There's a lot of people who can be described as vegetarians. I mean, there's so many different choices out there, and a lot of people slide in and out of it. But it's not abnormal. I found out that people flex what they do all the time, and nobody thinks any worse of them. In fact, people are pretty impressed if you improve your diet at all. And people would prefer that people become less animal product oriented, just because it takes so much more to more wear and tear on the environment to raise animals. But anyway, so I wanted to put that to rest. There are a bunch of other things I want to say about Kohberger, but first I'm going to try this bakery that my boss told me about, because I need some coffee right now, and I also want to try it before they close. That's a good little bakery. All right, I'm going to find a spot to park, and then we're going to talk more about Bryan Kohberger, but it's going to be about his health issues. Way back when. And I can't look at the camera all the time because I'm driving. Visual snow. And there was a YouTuber who went through this, went out and dug up these old social media posts. And, it's just amazing to me, as somebody with an old history degree, that so much documentation can be found on regular people through their social media posts. I mean, the young kids these days just put so much of their life out there that he was able to go back and find this. But apparently Kohberger, and he thinks it was Kohberger because it was linked to some old account he had or some email account he had in the past, in his much younger days, describing visual snow, quote unquote, or visual migraines. And visual migraines, I've had those in the past. When I was in college, we're talking late 80s, and I actually took a year off of college. I actually took a leave of absence for a year. I had visual migraines, and what that is there's like a spot, like there was a white spot right in the middle of what I was looking at. And it was a big spot, and the doctor was very concerned. He said that's what they call visual migraines, and he said, coffee might affect it because the coffee causes the expansion, contraction, or the dilation and whatnot of the blood vessels in the brain. They thought it had something to do with that, and he put me on different medications for migraines. And then we finally get to this last one. I mean, they basically didn't work, and we get to this last one, and it actually worked, and he was surprised about that. But along the way, I mean, there was one that even made my nails yellow and weird. And what I figured in retrospect, because after I dropped out of college and I was able to get more rest, of course I always carried a heavy academic load. I was doing 2 majors, and I did graduate with 2 majors. What I decided at the time, that was due to physical exhaustion. In retrospect, I was also drinking a diet soda, I think pretty much every day. That's one of the things it can do, is it causes neurological symptoms, and that's one reason NutraSweet or aspartame fell by the wayside. And you can read about it in the book by Dr. Russell Blaylock, a neurosurgeon, called Excitotoxins, the taste that kills. And he goes through how basically compounds like MSG or aspartame excite your neurons until they die, until some of them die. So every time you have like a diet pop with NutraSweet in it, or you have something with MSG in it, some of your brain or nerve cells die. And he gets into the biology of how that happens, and it's not pretty. Basically, one thing he covers in that book is magnesium and calcium, how calcium opens up the communication channels and magnesium closes them. And that kind of leads me into what I wanted to say about Kohberger and his visual snow or visual migraines related to nutrition. And here's, oh wow, there's a nice bookstore right here, so I'm just going to pull in here and talk a little more. But basically, there are a lot of compounds, and you know, as a vegan, I took a multivitamin every day, and people are like, oh, you're not going to get enough B12. Well, guess what? You know, the population at large has trouble with B12. We don't need that much of it, and even if you take vitamins, there isn't that much in the vitamins. Our body is meant to hold on to it tightly, which means we probably don't get a lot in our diet. It probably mostly comes from bacteria in our own intestines. And people who have problems with B12 are usually people with problems like older folks who don't get enough intrinsic factor, which is a calcium-based compound used to help digest food. And there's a whole range of things. But the majority of people with a B12 deficiency aren't vegan. And the problem with compounds like B12 or minerals like selenium is that they are compounds that our body uses to detox things. So, you know, you could go low on B12 or selenium just because you smoke or drink. And but I always believed in multivitamins because I wasn't confident no matter where I was that I was going to get enough enough vitamins and minerals or the right ones when I needed them. So a multivitamin is kind of like your insurance policy. There are nutritional reasons, and the fact that he became homicidal reminds me of a theory that I've put out there on the internet for many years. These school shooters, yes, a lot of them are, or all of them maybe, are on antidepressants. You know, people are saying things like they weren't tested on children. You know, one of the side effects is homicide and suicide. You know, things like this. Well, I brought up the question online over and over again in comments in many places. What if that kid is deficient in omega-3 fatty acids, for example, or any of the other compounds you need for brain health, B vitamins, acetylcholine, inositol, magnesium, calcium, anything that your brain needs? What if they're deficient in it from their diet, especially omega-3s, because most Americans are deficient in omega-3. Flaxseed oil, it's in things like walnuts, Brazil nuts, sesame seeds, a tiny bit in olive oil, and then some other things, pumpkin seeds. But you know, what if somebody's deficient in, especially leafy greens? It's in leafy greens. And instead of addressing that nutritional deficiency, because you're a medical doctor and you weren't trained in vitamins and minerals, at least not that much. I mean, from what I'd heard in the past, doctors may have had an optional weekend seminar on it, and who wants to go when they have exams coming up on other classes, who has time to go to a weekend seminar in nutrition? So basically, doctors don't know a lot about it. These days, they probably do more. They know more than the people back in my day. But doctors are also required to treat you with drugs. A lot of people don't realize this. If they say, oh yeah, why don't you go home and take some garlic, it'll go away. They really can't do that. I mean, the old-timey doctors could, but these days, they could get sued for that. So what if that kid's deficient? And instead of addressing that deficiency, you give them drugs. It does nothing for that deficiency. And the deficiency, because that's the way their diet is at home, just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until their mental health problems are off the scale. And I'm one of these people who believes that a lot of mental health problems aren't environmentally caused. I'm one of these people who believes there's a lot of biochemistry behind it, a lot of nutritional issues, and a lot of a certain amount of chemical exposures in the environment, a certain amount of pollution, but I think most of the time it's deficiency based. And I say that with some experience. I mean, I remember when I couldn't get off coffee without crying and being, depressed over the dumbest things until I started supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids. I mean, true story. This was actually in the 90s this happened to me. And it wasn't until I discovered omega-3s. A lot of things that we take for granted as being known forever have only been known in the popular domain for the last few decades. I mean, omega-3 fatty acids, that was a part of Joanna Budwig's cancer protocol, I think in the 50s. She used flax oil for it. Just by experimentation, she said that was the best one. But, the kid could be like those school shooters, only he used a knife. I mean, he could be low on a number of different things, and if his diet isn't addressing it and he's not supplementing with them, his deficiencies would have gotten worse and worse and worse, and maybe he didn't die from them, but maybe his brain was off the scale having problems. A lot of people don't think of that. That's kind of what I think is happening with most school shooters, is that they have symptoms of deficiency, of problems, mental health wise, and it's probably deficiency based, and they go to the doctor and the doctor says, oh yeah, you should just keep on doing what you're doing, just take this drug. And of course the drug just masks it for a while until it can't be masked anymore. But visual snow, there are a number of things. I wonder if it's similar to like when I've actually had eye symptoms. Like when I would rub my eyes, I would get shooters. It looked like little white fireworks when I'd rub my eyes sometimes in the past. And I figured out, well, eyes, the majority of what eyes are made of is water, as you can guess. But beyond that, I think the major compound or the major mineral or substance in eyes is zinc. I think it's almost half of your eyes are made of zinc, and the solid part. And so I thought, well, maybe I should, include the zinc in my calcium magnesium supplements, because they do have calcium magnesium zinc supplements. And when I did that, they went away. Then a friend of mine was telling me that she had that symptom. And I said, you know what solved it for me? And I told her, and she said, I want the exact same brand you got. Go get it for me. Here's some money. And I did, and it worked. I mean, so it could be that. It could be he was getting shooters, and that's what he thought was visual snow. Another thing could be the little, what they call floaters. And I've read in the past that that's from mercury poisoning. A lot of people had mercury poisoning as kids from their metal dental fillings. But beyond that, you usually don't get poisoned until they drill them out and it's vaporized, and then you inhale it. But that's another thing that B12 helps detox. Okay. And when he was talking about toxins, maybe it was some eye symptoms, and he read on it. It's like, oh yeah, it's from mercury poisoning, or whatever, mercury exposure. I guess poisoning is kind of an extreme word. I mean, it is slightly, you might still be alive, but you're exposed to this toxin, you have some of the poison in your system. And mercury is one of these things where it'll turn into a compound where it's fat soluble, and because your brain and your nervous tissues are so fatty, it'll follow them right up to your brain and park there. Unless you use something powerful like chelation therapy, which sucks the minerals out so badly that you have to take the good minerals because it takes the bad and the good out with it. It is really powerful. Unless you're using something like that, the brain is just hard, the blood-brain barrier, all this stuff. Your brain is fairly protected. Basically, I went through the trouble of having my metal fillings removed by a biological or holistic dentist years ago. And a number of years after that I first started getting it out, all those floaters went away. I haven't had them since. So maybe it is mercury related, I don't know. But there's so many things that could cause this. And they're all chemically based. He was having problems. I mean, he was having real problems. Maybe veganism helped solve that for him. But being a vegetarian isn't abnormal. Having dietary restrictions isn't abnormal. I don't think it's a good idea to go slamming all vegans and claiming they're OCD, or people who would prefer not to have animal products around their food, claiming that's some kind of mental disorder. or thinking that toxins poison you is a mental disorder, because people get poisoned by toxins all the time. I mean, talk to somebody who's been exposed to asbestos. It happens every day. It's a part of everyday life, and you look kind of misinformed at best if you say things like that. I do recognize that the man committed terrible crimes which were very hurtful to people, and the people he killed deserve to have their lives. I mean, I don't value people just by how much hurt it caused their family. I mean, that person had the right to live. And, I understand that anger. It's like, some people are saying, oh, yeah, death penalty, and all this. Well, I have my views on that, too. I mean, it's a heinous crime, and yes, it does make me angry that it happened, if he is, in fact, convicted of that. But at the same time, when you execute somebody, that's all you can get out of them. If you want to study their behavior, if you want to ask them questions, if you find out they committed other crimes and you want to ask them about those crimes or who their accomplices may have been, if you suspect that they may have had an accomplice, maybe they'd be willing to talk to you about that. Maybe they'd be willing to talk to you about how they came to this. That's all you're getting out of them. I mean, once they're gone, they're gone. You can't talk to them anymore. And it is hurtful to their families who most likely had nothing to do with these crimes. A lot of people on YouTube who they call, true crime podcasters, or they try to belittle them as if they're not journalists. As far as I'm concerned, digging through those social media profiles and their posts, that is legitimate journalism right there. So they are adding something to the conversation. I don't know if law enforcement even had time. Now, they did involve the FBI, so the FBI probably has enough agents to contribute to that. But, I mean, that's a lot of good original research right there, and I do have to admire people for that. To me, it is just like another school shooting. I think it's given more attention because of the shocking nature of, using a knife in an attack at that scale. But there are attacks like that all the time, and they're called school gun violence. And, the people who are shot down by guns deserve just as much of attention as people in this stabbing in Idaho. And also people who are non-white, people who are younger kids. I mean, people who aren't social media stars basically deserve just as much attention and sympathy and basically research into their case and as much help as these people are getting. I think a lot of times people are upset about it because they think, oh, well, I send my kid off to school, I think it's a safe place, and then this happens. I also at some point want to bring up Bryan Kohberger's drug use. That's another thing I wanted to talk about. I don't have a lot of first-hand experience about drug use, although I do have some experience with addicts. Remember that movie Forrest Gump where I said it was something his mother supposedly said to him, life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. And my father had a saying back in the 70s when he was telling his children to stay off of drugs. And he'd tell us drugs are like bathtub gin. Because you never know what's in it. And Dad actually, in his younger years, was a chemist. He and my mother were adamant that we don't use street drugs, and so we did. I have heard people claim that Kohberger went clean before he went to college, and I'm there like, huh? Did he ever tell you he went clean before he went to college? I mean, I went to college in the 80s, and it seemed like half the people I knew were on drugs. They were doing, all the guys who wrote for the student paper had to smoke weed before they wrote their articles. I get invited to parties, and there was one guy who actually used to work for the university and had a bunch of roommates who were students there, and he'd actually buy cocaine occasionally to impress the ladies, and he'd cut out little portions, and of course I didn't want any. I didn't do it, and I wasn't interested in starting. And people would beg him for that extra spot of cocaine, and it's like, he'd tell them, no, I'm the one who paid for it. I decide who gets to use it. And he'd usually do it himself. But, I mean, that was the 80s. People were actually grateful to get away from heroin because it was so addictive, which brings me back to what my other parent, my mother, said about street drugs. And she was very concerned about us hanging out with hippies or getting it to be a part of hippie culture, quote unquote hippies, because she's there like, they might get you hooked on drugs, and she was very concerned about the issue of addiction. So Dad was concerned about the chemicals in it, and Mom was concerned about the addiction end of it. Both are legitimate points about street drugs, and these days, they're even more addictive, and people make them addictive on purpose by putting little bits of fentanyl in it, which can kill you because the fentanyl's so powerful. Just if they get like just a little touch too much, it'll kill you. So you gotta be careful of that stuff. So people claim he was a heroin addict, a big one, way back in the day, and then supposedly they think he got clean to go to college. Well, you don't have to get clean to go to college. There are so many people at the University of Wisconsin who were on drugs in the 80s and attending college at the same time. They were on drugs, man. Drugs were everywhere. It was the crack cocaine epidemic. Iran-Contra was going on. The CIA made sure there were plenty of drugs going around because they made money off of it. So, here we have a guy who may or may not be drug addicted. Now, when people say that was a party house, quote unquote party house means to me that there's a lot of substance abuse going on. Yeah, alcohol's a given, but likely there were drugs as well. And they talk about his phone pinging in the area. Well, apparently there was a Walmart in the area, which kind of shoots holes in the fact that that's so significant. But there's also a possibility, they were near a frat house. How many frat houses don't have a lot of drugs going in and out? There was even a claim from somebody claiming to be a friend of the surviving roommate who said she was on quote-unquote Molly at the time. And one of the reasons she didn't want to call police was because she was afraid she'd get in trouble. Now, I have serious stalkers, and I've had them since the 90s, and there's a whole range of issues about self-preservation when you're under threat of losing your life. And that goes beyond just not wanting to get in trouble with the cops. It is terrifying, and I did want to get into that another time when I talk about her. Now, he may have been going there to see a dealer that everybody knew about. He may have been the dealer. We don't know these details yet. It's not uncommon for people who don't have a lot of money, and they have to support a drug habit, for them to buy a little more than they need and sell some of it to their friends to support their habit. There are a lot more choices out there these days. So he may have been on several different drugs at different times. Getting violent. What does that say to you? Cocaine, meth? I'm not even aware of which ones are like that and which ones aren't. There are a lot of things out there, even homemade formulas, and don't ever get into that. There have been people who've been paralyzed for life. If you're a kid and you're thinking, homemade formulas, I could save some money, don't do it. Don't do it. You could kill yourself that way. You could kill yourself by taking street drugs, but it's even worse if you try to make it and you make a mistake. I've read about cases like that, and it's not pretty. And I am going to cut out here because I'm going to turn around here and go to the restaurant. And also the camera here is already switched to infrared, and I hate that. It's all just black and white. So that's it for tonight. I'll do more another time.